Only a single candle burned in the room, and in its light Kavya had frozen, staring at the wall. Her shadow was moving, but Kavya herself stood completely still. She hadn't lifted a hand, hadn't shifted a foot, and yet her shadow was slowly sliding across the wall, as if it had somewhere to be. Rohan, Rohan, wake up! My shadow. Her voice was so faint she could barely hear it herself. That was the night that turned Kavya's entire life upside down. And the truth that eventually surfaced proved that some family roots aren't nearly as clean as they appear on the surface. Kavya had been married only 6 months. It was a love marriage with Rohan. The two had met in the city, been together since their college days, and finally married with both families' blessing. Everything in her in-law's house was fine, except for one thing. Rohan's aunt, his father's younger sister, had been strangely quiet around Kavya from the very start. She never spoke much, never got close, just watched from a distance, as if waiting for something. Everything went on normally until one night, exactly 3 days before Diwali, Kavya began feeling a strange suffocation in her sleep. It felt as if someone were sitting on top of her, their full weight pressing on her chest, but there was no one in the room. The next morning there were blue marks on her neck, 5 finger-shaped bruises, as if someone had gripped her tightly. Rohan brushed it off as a bad dream. But the same thing happened the next night and the night after that. On the 4th night, Kavya had an experience that shook even Rohan. At exactly midnight, the two of them were lying in their room, the lights off, the room faintly lit by the glow drifting in from the balcony. Rohan suddenly woke up. He saw Kavya sitting up in bed, her eyes open but completely still, like a mannequin. And on the wall, in the dim flicker of the candle, Kavya's shadow was moving on its own, raising an arm, turning its head, while the real Kavya hadn't moved an inch. "Kavya! Kavya! Are you okay?" Rohan shouted, shaking her. A moment later Kavya's eyes blinked, and she came to, but her face had gone white with fear. I felt like I was in 2 places at once. One of me was here on the bed, and another me was on the other side of the wall, moving at someone else's command. She broke down sobbing. The very next day, Rohan took her to the family doctor. A full round of tests followed: blood pressure, sugar, thyroid, even a neurologist in case it was some kind of sleep disorder. But every report came back completely normal. The doctor said, "This might be stress-related. I'd suggest more rest." But Rohan knew that what he'd seen with his own eyes was far more serious than stress. By the 5th night, things got worse. Kavya suddenly spiked a high fever, and in her delirium she began muttering in a language that neither Rohan nor anyone else in the house could understand. Even her voice had changed, deep, rough, like that of an old woman. Everyone in the household gathered outside the room in fear. Then Rohan's mother finally worked up the courage to say, "I think we should call your aunt. Maybe she knows something." The moment she heard this, Rohan's father's face fell. "No, there's no need to call her." But things had gotten so bad that necessity overrode whatever feelings lay behind that refusal. The aunt was called. The instant she stepped into the room and saw Kavya, her face went pale. She studied Kavya closely for a moment, then said quietly, "I was afraid this day would come. I've been afraid of it for a long time." "Aunt, what do you know about this? Are you hiding something?" Rohan asked, his voice a mix of anger and fear. The aunt took a deep breath and finally opened the secret she had kept locked in her chest for 20 years. "This story goes back to when your father and I were young. We had a cousin, Nisha. She lived with us, she was an orphan, we were the ones who raised her. But when it came time to divide the family property, your grandfather gave Nisha nothing, because she wasn't a daughter by blood. Cut her deeply. She left the house, and as she left, she swore that every bride who ever entered this family would suffer the same pain she had. The pain of being rejected by her own people, the pain of being left utterly alone." "But Aunt, what does that have to do with Kavya? That's ancient history," Rohan asked. The aunt spoke heavily. Before she left, Nisha had learned tantric practices from a healer in the village. As she was leaving, she buried something beneath the threshold of the front door. "I saw her do it myself, but I thought she was just flinging something out of anger. I had no idea it was such a deep-rooted ritual. Any bride who comes into this house, if she stays more than 6 months and truly settles in, Nisha's shadow starts to take hold of her, as if she wants to reclaim her place. Rohan's father, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. It's true. Your eldest aunt went through something similar a few months after her wedding. We went to a healer back then who pulled an amulet out from under the threshold, and only then did things settle. I thought that was the end of it, but Nisha's anger must have run so deep that she buried something again. That very night, they dug beneath the threshold of the main door. A few inches down, they found a small black vial containing a tuft of hair, a few peppercorns, and an old, torn photograph, the photograph of a young woman's face, filled with anger. The mouth of the vial was sealed with black wax, and a thread was wound 3 times around it. They called in the priest from the nearby temple, who also knew some tantric practices. The moment he saw the vial, he said, "This binding is very old and very deep. Whoever did this wasn't acting out of anger alone. There was a deep, unresolved pain behind it too. This can't be broken by mantras alone. The feeling behind it has to be soothed as well." The priest asked the family, "Is Nisha still alive? If so, breaking the vial won't be enough. Her heart has to be put at peace, or this binding will keep coming back, again and again." Hearing this, everyone in the house exchanged uneasy glances. No one knew where Nisha was now, or even if she was still alive. No one had spoken her name in 20 years. Rohan's father began reaching out to old family contacts, and after 3 days of searching, they learned that Nisha was living in a nearby city, alone, now elderly, spending her final years in an old-age home. Hearing this, tears welled up in the aunt's eyes. 20 years, and we never once checked on her. The whole family went to the old-age home. Nisha was now a frail, wrinkled elderly woman, and the anger that had once filled her eyes was gone, replaced only by a deep exhaustion and loneliness. When she recognized Rohan's father, her eyes filled with tears. "You? After all these years?" Rohan's father folded his hands before her. "We were wrong, Nisha. We never accepted you as our own, even though you were always our sister, not by blood, but by heart. Please forgive us." Nisha stayed quiet for a while, then said softly, "I did what I did out of anger, out of pain. But honestly, I never imagined that binding would reach this far, across so many generations. I didn't even know it was still active. All I wanted was for someone to make me feel as much a part of the family as blood ties make you feel. Forgive me. I never meant to cause this much pain to any bride who ever entered this house." Nisha pulled a small key from her old trunk and explained that on the very night she'd left the house, she had hidden one more thing. Behind the old house, beneath an old peepal tree. A counter-charm to fully break the binding, one she had prepared herself, out of fear that she might one day change her mind. I never found the courage to go back for it. Maybe some part of me always knew this day would come. Beneath the peepal tree they found a small amulet, which Nisha herself tied around Kavya's wrist, tears streaming down her face as she asked for forgiveness. That very night, Kavya slept deeply and peacefully, for the first time in days. The next morning, she said she dreamed of a young woman who smiled and slowly faded away into mist. From that day on, Nisha was welcomed back into the family. She now lives in that same house, spending the final years of her life surrounded by love and belonging. A new kind of bond has formed between Kavya and Nisha. Sometimes pain becomes the very foundation of the deepest relationships. Kavya often wonders, what if the family, out of fear, had never called Nisha back that night? Would the binding have eventually broken on its own? Or would every generation's bride have gone on suffering the same pain, never knowing its roots lay in someone's unresolved sorrow? This story teaches us one thing for certain. Any binding, any curse, is only as strong as the pain left unresolved behind it. The moment that pain is heard, understood, and forgiven, the binding itself begins to weaken. So the next time there's an old, unspoken story in your own family, a forgotten relationship gathering dust, will you let it stay buried, or will you find the courage to face it? Is there a secret in your family, 2. That no one has touched in years?